Is your house a liability or an asset? Everyone dreams of owning their own house one day. However, not everyone can afford mortgage payments and the expenses associated with it, forcing them to rent instead of buy. Yet, personal finance experts like Robert Kiyosaki, an American businessman and the author of the famous book Rich Dad Poor Dad, argue that owning a house is actually a liability rather than an asset. Why does he say this? How can a house be a liability and not an asset? Stay tuned, because in today's video we will be answering these questions and we'll discuss whether your house is a liability or an asset. But before we start, make sure that you subscribe to our channel for more awesome content like this. Let's move ahead with our question. Is your house a liability or an asset? In financial accounting, an asset is a resource that you own and has some economic value, whereas a liability is the sum of money or any other thing you owe. If we go by the definitions of assets and liabilities from a financial accounting perspective, a house is an asset because it is a resource that you own and has some economic value that you can use in the future. You own your house and you can use it for living in it or can rent it out and derive economic value from it. However, personal finance coaches define assets and liabilities in terms of cash flow. Anything that brings in cash is considered an asset, whereas anything that takes out or consumes cash is considered a liability. So from this perspective, is your house a liability or an asset? Let's try to answer the question by considering two different situations. 1, you buy a house for yourself to live in, and 2, you buy a house to rent out. Let's consider the first case in which you buy a house for yourself to live in. Many people choose to buy a house instead of renting because they believe that the mortgage payment will contribute towards building equity in the house. This is true. However, for the first few years, you will literally only be paying off interest on the loan, and it can take some time before you start to chip away at any principal. On the contrary, monthly payments of rent will not contribute towards anything other than just paying the monthly rent amount to the landlord. Buying your own home will also require a significant amount of down payment, which is often equal to 20% of the value of the house. As a renter, though, you won't need to have any down payment. Usually all you need to rent a house is a good rental history and a bond payment, which is usually around the value of 2 to 4 weeks of rent payments paid up front. A homeowner will also be responsible for the repair and maintenance of the house, property taxes, insurance, and other expenses, such as utilities. As for renters, other than the monthly rent, a tenant doesn't have to bear any of these costs, as they will all be the responsibility of the landlord. Buying a house is often an emotional decision, but comes with a huge financial commitment for a long period of time, ranging from 15 to 30 years. If you're not financially stable enough to afford the monthly payments for a long period of time, you should maybe consider renting instead of buying. So, based on the cash flow definition of assets and liabilities, a house you own and live in is considered a liability rather than an asset because of the regular and significant cash expenses. Now let's talk about the second situation, where you decide to buy a house and rent it out. When you buy a house and rent it out to a tenant, you will generate monthly rental income. This income will be used to pay your mortgage and other associated expenses. Suppose you're living in a rented house as a tenant, paying a monthly rent of $700, and want to buy a house using your $50,000 savings as a down payment. If the mortgage payment for the house you buy is $1,000 per month, and you can rent it out for $2,000 per month, you end up generating a $1,000 profit. If you then deduct $700 as your monthly rent for the place you'll be living, and $200 as your average monthly costs for maintenance, property taxes, and insurance, you'll now have a net positive cash flow of $100 per month. If the rental income you receive is high enough to cover all of your expenses, this can be considered as an asset instead of a liability. Now, some of you might be in a situation where you're living in your own house and are paying the monthly mortgage payments regularly. How can you turn this into an income-generating asset? If you're living in a house where you can rent out a portion of it to a tenant, you can generate cash flow. The higher the rent you charge your tenant, the lower your contribution will be towards the monthly mortgage payment, reducing or eliminating your financial burden. If your rental income from the rented portion of your house is larger than your monthly mortgage payment, you'll receive a net positive cash flow, turning your house into an asset. Airbnb is a prime example of how you can use the home you're currently living in and generate an income from it at the same time. For example, if you have a spare room at your house, you could list it on Airbnb for maybe $80 per night. Now, assume you can achieve an occupancy rate of around 70%, which is a pretty common rate to aim for. This would result in 21 days out of 30 that the room is occupied on a monthly basis. So 21 days times $80 is $1,680. That one room that you're currently using as storage could in many cases completely cover your mortgage payment. In effect, this would mean that you're living in the house for free, maybe even generating a profit as well. Now, obviously there are some implications here, as you will need to clean the room, greet guests, and also pay tax on any income derived from the short-term rental. But this can still be a great solution to turn a house that's costing you money every month into an asset that pays you every month. So, am I saying that you shouldn't buy a house? Of course not. This video is to make you aware of the costs associated with owning a house and introduce you to the concept of interpreting assets and liabilities in terms of cash flow. Many people will still buy their dream house no matter what the costs are. On the other hand, some people will never own a house and will keep living in rented properties, while some homeowners share a portion of their houses with tenants, earning a rental income. Another thing worth mentioning is that, as a homeowner, you're kinda stuck in the same location and can't move freely without either selling your property or renting it out. However, as a tenant, you have the freedom to get up and move wherever you want, as long as you can either see out your tenancy agreement or find someone to take over your agreement. To conclude this video and answer the question, is your house an asset or a liability? Well, it comes down to how you personally view assets and liabilities. For me, I tend to agree with Robert Kiyosaki on this one. If it's not making you money, then it's not an asset in my opinion. I hope that by now you understand the concept of assets and liabilities and can easily determine where your house sits on this spectrum. What do you think? Which method do you think is best? Or maybe you have a different method altogether. Let us know in the comments section below. As always, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I'll see you in the next one.